Matthew Miller, Frost's Broken Roads. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost is arguably one of the most popular poems ever written. Read at graduations, eulogies, even in movies and car commercials, it is often interpreted as an ode to individualism. Frost's image of the road less traveled has become synonymous with daring life choices that make all the difference in living a fulfilling life. Some may latch on to this as the poem's deeper meaning. However, this convenient conclusion ignores several conflicting yet beautiful details that lead the poem down a path of broken metaphor and temporal inconsistency. To truly recognize what Frost is building in this poem, a few nagging inconsistencies must be considered. In the first line of the poem, the traveler is depicted hiking in a yellow wood, wherein he finds a fork in his path. This setting is the foundation of a common metaphor, but transposing familiar notions of a figurative fork in the road onto Frost's poem requires acceptance of the traveler's metaphoric natural world and its temporal scheme, or some form of unified movement through time, as the critic Cleanth Brooks describes it in his classic book on poetic structure, The Well-Wrought Urn. If the path that is covered in leaves no step had trodden black makes all the difference in a life, common sense indicates the decision to choose that path has to occur early enough during a lifetime to properly affect its outcome. The speaker-traveler affirms this, telling the reader that he shall be telling them the story of his decision with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. In other words, the traveler must be fairly young, otherwise he wouldn't have ages and ages left to tell his story. It may not be apparent at a surface level, but this complicates our understanding of the poem's implicit story. It is common knowledge that morning, the beginning of the day, is often paralleled figuratively with the beginning of other things, e.g., the dawn of civilization. In this sense, the setting helps to solidify the poem's established temporal sense. The earliness of the day, morning, parallels the early point in life when the traveler makes his life-altering decision. However, the description of the scene, the yellow wood, where the ground lay in leaves, indicates that late autumn has set in around the forest. Parallels between seasonal progression and the human life cycle saturate literature and art with such metaphors as the springtime of youth and the hoary winter of old age. With that in mind, the end of autumn represents the bitter end of productive years and the first step into the cold and death of winter. So, embedded in the poem is a temporal inconsistency. The traveler is young, with ages and ages yet to live, but the autumn setting implies his world is quickly coming to an end. Another question that complicates a traditional understanding of the poem is that of identity. The narrator claims that he is sorry he could not travel both paths and be one traveler. For him to stray off his path would equal becoming a different person. He could not travel both and be one traveler. However, one person can easily be two different travelers in a lifetime, i.e., one person can take both a cruise vacation and a backpacking trip, two very different traveling styles. The traveler speaker even admits this is possible by saying he could keep the first for another day. His excuse for not traveling both paths was not that it was impossible, but rather that, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. Although he believes one of the paths has the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, in practically the same breath, he casts doubt on the claim that it is less traveled, admitting other travelers have worn down the two trails really about the same. The speaker in this poem is not Emerson's self reliant transcendentalist who can speak what he thinks today in words as hard as cannonballs, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything he said today. Frost's syntax and punctuation add even more nuance. The poem consists of one sentence that takes up the first two stanzas and part of the third, in which our traveler deliberates and eventually makes his decision, and the three sentences of the third and fourth stanzas in which our traveler lives with his choice. As the poem progresses to the point where our traveler makes his decision, we see punctuation that is irregular when compared with the rest of the poem. An exclamation point when the traveler finally makes a decision, possibly showing excess emotion. An em dash followed by a repeated word when retelling his story that functions almost like a stutter, possibly showing regret, lack of confidence in his choice. With this in mind, it seems as though our traveler had a tough time making his decision, and afterward there is no obvious approval or happiness with it, only that it made all the difference, which could be positive or negative. Placing the poem in its historical context further complicates these questions. According to an article written for the Poetry Foundation by the poet Catherine Robinson, The Road Not Taken was actually written as a joke for a friend, the poet Edward Thomas. Indeed, when Frost and Thomas went walking together, Thomas would often choose one fork in the road because he was convinced it would lead them to something. Perhaps a patch of rare wildflowers or a particular bird's nest. In a letter, Frost goaded Thomas, saying, "No matter which road you take, you'll always sigh and wish you'd taken another." Introducing the poet's biography might be considered by many a sin against the work, especially for those espousing Cleanth Brooks's celebration of poetic unity and universal meaning. However, knowing this information fills in several gaps about the poem. Instead of confusing inconsistencies and paradoxical meanings, the poem can now be viewed, at least partly, as teasing from a friend. It is easy to imagine an indecisive Thomas standing and staring down the fork in the path, afraid of what he'll miss if he picks the wrong trail, and then on the way home telling Frost, with a sigh, about all he swore he missed on the road he didn't take. This being said, Frost published this work knowing full well of its depth and epistemological possibilities, saying in a letter, "My poems are all set to trip the reader, head foremost into the boundless." Frost's timeless poem is an elegant narrative filled with serene imagery and laced with layers of mystery. Readers of this canonical work can easily find themselves slipping into the easy, traditional reading of an ode to individualism. Upon closer inspection, there is only one thing clear about The Road Not Taken, which is said best in the words Frost loved to tell his readers regarding his classic poem. "You have to be careful of that one. It's a tricky poem, very tricky."